In the canon of firearm lore, one weapon stands above the rest as the de facto king of the submachine guns, remaining undisputed in its position since it claimed the title many moons ago, and receiving little in the way of competition for much of its life. No other post-war era submachine gun has the reputation of this classic, no other has become as ubiquitous with the world's armed forces, and no other has been in service for over half a century. And that SMG is obviously the legendary American 180, the Heckler & Co. Machine & Pistol 5, better known by its abbreviation, the MP5. Developed from the G3 battle rifle, the German icon would rise to fame as Europe's war on terror expanded dramatically in the 1970s, with an unlikely incident in the 80s skyrocketing the MP5's legend into the same circles as the likes of Eugene Stoner and John Moses Browning, peace be upon him. In the face of new creative ways terrorists try to destroy my freedom and democracy, the MP5 has remained steadfast in service, and capable of dispensing 9mm justice in the direction of anyone deemed a threat to national security. Its effectiveness in doing so giving rise to many legendary tales over the years. So let's get into the history and evolution of the MP5, and how it became and has remained the supposed heavyweight champion of the 9mm submachine guns to this day. Now for a mandatory explanation of some history, because I like yapping, and you all apparently like listening to my rambling madness. Before we can get to the king of the submachine guns, we need to start with the first submachine guns, which emerged in the early 20th century when World War I combat veteran John Submachine shat out the first automatic No, I'm kidding, but the first weapons to fit the description of submachine guns would emerge out of the weird multicultural death orgy that was the First World War. After the initial excitement among European nations that war had returned to their continent and that they'd finally be able to experience the excitement of armed conflict in a battle that wouldn't take place under the scorching African sun, reality would quickly set in, as would all of Europe's armies, building a vast network of trenches along the front lines of which remnants still exist today. It would be these trenches that would become the key battleground of this war, with each side throwing thousands of men at the enemy's trenches in the hopes of capturing mere meters of ground. Something people seem to miss about this conflict is why this was happening, so pay attention because this will be important soon. Technology had advanced dramatically since the last major European war, with machine guns, aircraft, and much larger artillery becoming commonplace as tensions rose in the early 20th century. But what had not evolved as much were the European tactics, and the leaders of Europe's armies, the pampered ivory tower-dwelling princesses many of them were, had no better idea than just throwing men at the machine guns of the enemy until they either won or ran out of men. Unfortunately for the men on the front lines, they were about as expendable to their governments as protesters are in China. But fortunately for these men, someone with a brainstem eventually thought that maybe they should change their tactics, and he was subsequently executed for cowardice. A few people who were a little smarter though figured that instead of changing the rigid doctrine European armies operated under, they would build upon them, and set about developing a weapon that would help clear trenches kinda like a broom. A trench sweeper to annihilate the enemy?
Foreshadowing is a narrative device.
The first of such weapons to emerge was the German MP18, which would become the basis for many submachine gun designs that would follow through into the 1960s. And by the end of the war, the American attempt to build such a weapon, the quote-unquote trench broom known as the Annihilator 1, would emerge, becoming the Thompson submachine gun in the early 1920s, the first weapon to bear the moniker that would become the de facto name for any magazine-fed automatic pistol-caliber carbine. As with tanks, while impressive, they would have little impact on the outcome of the First World War, but its usage proved effective for clearing trenches where it was used, with SMG users having a dramatic advantage over anyone they encountered if they managed to reach the other side of no man's land, with a big emphasis on the if. Subsequently, with the promise submachine guns had shown, massive investment in their development would follow the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, but the MP5's origins truly begin with Hitler's violation of said treaty. The sequel to the morbidly ironically named War to End All Wars would give rise to a similar wave of technological innovation on all sides of the conflict as the original, and I'm sure you're all aware of my opinions on the modern understanding of these innovations. Despite my deconstruction of the myth of Germany's technological superiority, the Germans would produce some critical research and advancements in infantry weapons, some of which would go on to form the MP5, with German engineers Ludwig Vorgrimler and Theodor Loeffler working at Mauser being the fellas we're most interested in. Mauser had been one of Europe's premier firearm manufacturers since it was founded in the early 19th century, producing a number of important weapons in firearm history, such as the C96 semi-automatic handgun, the Gewehr 98 bolt-action rifle, the K98K bolt-action rifle, and Gewehr 41 semi-automatic rifle, becoming a crucial piece of the German war machine during World War II for weapons manufacturing and development. Over the course of the war, Germany would revolutionize modern rifle design, inventing the first mass-produced assault rifle, the heinously overhyped STG-44, in 1943, and Mauser, seeing an opportunity to develop the concept further, made a lighter and easier to construct prototype, as well as cannibalizing the roller-locked operating mechanism of the MG42 and tweaking it to create a roller-delayed operation for the weapon, which they would call the Maschinenkarabiner Gerät 06H, but their rifle is better known by its much less complicated name, the STG-45. As the Allies closed in on Germany and after their defeat, the West and the East began playing the world's largest game of Hungry Hungry Hippos, snatching up as many German scientists as they could to bolster their weapons programs in what would become the Cold War. The Mauser team Vorgrimler and Loeffler were a part of would be saved from winding up in the Soviet Union, but unfortunately would be cursed to work in France, continuing their roller-delayed developments at the newly founded CEAM Institute, a weapons development unit in Mulhouse. Here, Vorgrimler and Loeffler would continue perfecting their wartime designs for a roller-delayed blowback weapon, managing to produce the CEAM Model 50 before the French, realizing the weapon's potential, scrapped the project. Vorgrimler would leave CEAM soon thereafter, managing to escape France and heading south back into fascist territory to the Spanish CETME Institute. Here, he would restart his work on roller-delayed firearms, reconfiguring the Model 50 for the CETME 792x41mm cartridge, and then the Germans became interested in the project and requested a 7.62 NATO-chambered version from CETME. But because the Spanish don't speak German, they re-chambered it to a locally produced 7.62x40mm cartridge. Someone quickly realized this wasn't quite right, so the rifle was then re-chambered for the 7.62x51mm round, releasing the modified weapon as the CETME Model 2 in 1958, better known by its Spanish government name, the Model 58. Around this time, the recently created NATO had realized that maybe West Germany should have an army, given that the Soviet Union's influence bled into half the territory considered German, and soon the Bundeswehr were formed, with everyone hoping that this time they'd behave themselves and not invade France, which so far has held true. This new modern army to be the first line of defense against the ever-present threat of Karl Marx's delusions would need a modern rifle to do its job, and the Belgian FN-FAL was seen as the obvious frontrunner for the army's designation. It had been widely adopted by much of the Western world and had recently been selected by the West German Border Guard as the G1, but it would still have to compete with offerings from Switzerland with their SIG SG-510, the Americans with the Armalite AR-10, and the Spanish with the CETME Model 58. In testing, the FAL remained the favourite, with the CETME a close second. But after FN refused to grant the West German government a license to produce the weapon themselves, probably getting flashbacks to the last time Germany wanted something that belonged to Belgium, the Germans would have to look elsewhere for a weapon. After seducing NWM, the Dutch company that held the production rights to the CETME rifle outside of Spain, with a contract to supply ammunition to the West German Air Force, the Dutch manufacturer would give the Germans the rights to the CETME design, with Heckler & Co. and Rheinmetall AG contracted to produce the weapon in Germany. This would emerge as the G3 in 1959, and soon H&K would begin developing a range of weapons based on the design. They looked upon the rifle born from Mauser's wartime experiments that had finally returned to Germany after being bounced around Western Europe since the end of the war, and saw the potential it had for a variety of different weapons of varying calibers to fill varying roles. With NATO's establishment in the mid-1950s, someone in the room had a brilliant idea. Why don't we standardize the cartridges we use in our weapons to simplify logistics? Everyone agreed and thought this was excellent, and then immediately began arguing. I'll spare you the boring technical shit about who wanted what and why, but by the 1960s, NATO had settled on the 7.62 by 51mm round for full-size battle rifles and machine guns, the 5.56 by 45mm round for assault rifles, which would actually be standardized a little later in the early 1970s, and the 9x19mm round for handguns and submachine guns, though America might need a few decades to process that last one. The Warsaw Pact, the communist answer to NATO, would do something quite similar, and H&K viewed the lists of these standard cartridges as free real estate for them to develop their design further, with the Germans beginning to pump out G3-derived weapons as the Cold War began to heat up in the 60s, like EA pumping out sports games. Okay, that's a little unfair. H&K have a soul, but more importantly they have quality assurance. Anyway, the first of these would be the HK-21, a 7.62mm chambered general-purpose machine gun design, which arrived in 1961. The next would be the HK-32, a prototype rifle chambered for the Soviet 7.62 by 39mm round, but this would never be produced in large numbers. And then in 1964, H&K would begin work on the 9mm chambered G3 derivative, named the HK-54. Development would be headed by some German guys in Germany, and over the next 2 years they would condense the G3 down into a package nearly half the length and weight of the original. I mean, come on, they were hardly reinventing the wheel here, and its G3-derived design meant it too joined the club of masochistic guns you have to slap for them to work, with the HK-54 entering production in 1966. It was swiftly accepted into service with the West German Federal Police and Special Forces, initially as the MP64, but for much of its early life, the weapon, soon redesignated the MP5, went largely unnoticed by the wider world, being overshadowed by the Uzi, mainly due to the many stories of the Israeli design's effectiveness emerging from the first few Arab-Israeli wars. That was until May of 1980. You see, up until the MP5's introduction, the submachine gun was not really considered a precision weapon, nor was it really intended to be one. I mean, look at the common depiction of the Uzi. Submachine guns, while not inaccurate by any stretch of the imagination, were viewed similar to how the majority of machine guns still are today. Their advantages came mostly from their rate of fire, and their accuracy was more of an afterthought, though they would be accurate enough if shit hit the fan, with small-framed submachine guns filling the role of providing suppressive fire and devastating enemies in close quarters. The MP5 would change this, however, and even in its early days, the new submachine gun's closed-bolt design meant that in full auto fire, it was noticeably more controllable and easier to keep the sights on target than its contemporaries. Around the time of the weapon's introduction, Europe's war on terror was just beginning, getting a 20-year jump on the Americans in being attacked at home by pissed-off dudes mainly from the Middle East. And for much of the 1970s, Europe was losing, with the tragic 1972 Munich massacre and its aftermath staining the reputations of not just the German GSG-9, but all of Europe's fresh-faced counter-terror units. One of these units, however, was beginning to gain a reputation for their lethality, the British SAS, a new incarnation of the legendary L Detachment from World War II, retooled for modern counter-terror operations. Regular police officers would often watch the SAS, equipped with their MP5 submachine guns, conduct all manner of training exercises throughout the 1970s, observing the counter-terrorism operatives preparing for almost any kind of situation. from the hijacking of planes to the storming of barricaded buildings, and even the recapturing of Britain's nuclear plants should they be attacked. And the SAS's reputation in the public eye for getting the job done would be exemplified in the 1975 Balcombe Street siege, where 4 members of the IRA took 2 hostages in a residential area of London after a police chase, with the 6-day standoff ending abruptly after the hostage-takers heard a news bulletin that the police would soon be assisted by the SAS and surrendered on the spot. While following the ongoing Iran hostage crisis the Americans were embroiled in, on April 30th, 1980, the SAS would receive word from a former member working with the Metropolitan Police that the Iranian embassy in London had just been stormed by armed gunmen and hostages had been taken. And little did anyone yet know that 5 days, some 18 hours, and 17 minutes later, the SAS and their MP5s would be forever etched into the minds of the world. The SAS had arrived on the 2nd day of the siege, but once the Iranian separatists that had barricaded themselves in the embassy killed a hostage on the 6th day, the SAS prepared to enter the building, with the unit breaching the embassy mere minutes after the gunmen pushed the body out of the front doors. Equipped with MP5s and Browning high-power pistols, the SAS breached the building, and 17 minutes after their mission, codenamed Operation Nimrod, had begun, 5 of the 6 gunmen lay dead, the last surviving gunman being arrested, with only 1 other hostage losing their life, and the SAS taking no casualties. News of the SAS storming the building and bringing out almost every hostage completely unharmed quickly dominated the airwaves, and the weapon at the forefront of every image broadcast around the globe would be the MP5. From here, the MP5 became an overnight sensation, and it's hard to do justice to just how significant this was for the German SMG, as well as counter-terror units globally, with the story of the 17-minute SAS storm aided by their laser-accurate MP5s, creating the proficient and professional image of counter-terror units that exists to this day. The weapon's deadly precision would become cited as a large part of the SAS's success and the lack of casualties during the siege, and H&K would be inundated with orders for their submachine gun. Suddenly everyone was interested in the German SMG, and soon the MP5 would spread across the globe at a rate that would make COVID blush, the weapon making its way to the States and becoming a staple of units such as the Navy SEALs, MUSOC, and Delta Force, along with most police SWAT teams in the US. Mexico, France, oddly enough Iran, name a country, and after 1980, their armed forces were most likely trying to get their hands on the MP5, with barely any other submachine gun in production being able to match the weapon on every front in testing. Its skyrocketing popularity resulted in hundreds of different variants emerging over the years, but here's a quick guide to the most important ones. The MP5 has 5 core variants in addition to the original: the A1, A2, A3, A4, and A5, which differ only in their stocks and firing modes. The A1 being full auto with no buttstock, the A2 being full auto with a fixed stock, the A3 being full auto with a retractable stock, the A4 having a 3-round burst and a fixed stock, and finally the A5 with a retractable stock and 3-round burst. The MP5 SD was first produced in 1974 and has an integral suppressor along with several variants in a similar vein to the original MP5, with various fire selector and stock length options. The MP5K, or Goetz, was developed in 1976, being a shortened version of the MP5A2 with a lighter bolt, meaning that not only is it smaller and lighter, but it also has a higher fire rate. By 1977, the straight magazines used in the MP5 were improved, and were replaced with the now iconic gay magazines. Get it? 'Cause they're bent? Okay, I'll see myself out. The MP5N was developed specifically for the US Navy in 1983, and features an ambidextrous trigger group, a threaded barrel for suppressors, and a padded retractable stock. Then, in 1992, H&K introduced 2 new MP5 variants, the MP5/10, chambered in 10mm auto, and the MP5/40, chambered in 40 Smith & Wesson. Both fire different calibers to other MP5 variants and are based on the existing MP5A4 and A5 designs, but problems with these two variants led to them being discontinued after 2000. The MP5F was developed for the French Army in 1999, featuring a padded retractable stock, ambidextrous sling loops and bolts, and internal modifications to handle high-pressure ammunition. Civilian variants also exist of the majority of these, being adapted to be legally compliant, as well as there being a litany of foreign clones of the MP5 arising over the years, with Chinese manufacturer Norinco's probably being the most notorious. Since the MP5's vindication in May of 1980, stories of the submachine gun's effectiveness seem to crop up about as commonly as the weapon itself, from the Italian carabinieri employing it in a shootout that ended in the arrest of a wanted mafia member, to the Indian National Security Guard using it to clear terrorists from the Taj Mahal Hotel, to the German GSG-9 recapturing a hijacked plane with the SMG. But the MP5's effectiveness has led it to become embroiled in a few controversies in its life. The first major one comes directly from the Iranian embassy siege, where the SAS shot and killed 2 hostage-takers that were reportedly surrendering themselves, but the incident would be later determined to be justified homicide, whatever the fuck that oxymoron is supposed to mean. The most controversial of all the controversies comes instead from America, where MP5s were widely used by the ATF at Mount Carmel in Waco, Texas. And if you know anything about this incident, you know why I'm quickly going to move on before I'm put on a list. Fortunately, the more questionable usage of the MP5 is vastly overshadowed by the many successful operations undertaken by the submachine gun over the years. And even as 9mm submachine guns became somewhat irrelevant with the introduction of Kevlar armor in the 1970s, the MP5's popularity hasn't slowed in the slightest, especially with its continued widespread visibility in popular media since the 1980s, with its iconic grenade launcher-equipped variant from the original Half-Life strangely enough being a real thing, making the MP5 one of the few submachine gun designs capable of supporting such an attachment. H&K would read the writing on the wall though, and after developing a few more rifles based on the G3, the HK-33 and G41, they invested in what would become the UMP in the late 1990s, though their Cold War classic still remains in production alongside it. The weapon's story is far from over though, with the MP5 MLI, or Midlife Improvement, a modernized upgrade to the MP5, emerging in 2013, and truly bringing the iconic design into the 21st century. In all the forms the SMG has been produced in, the MP5 has played a role in combat operations around the world since the Cold War began to cool down, earning a stellar reputation for its accuracy and reliability. Its excellent geometry and ergonomics earned it the unofficial moniker of the gun that shoots itself, and if you can't hit a target with the MP5, well, that's just a skill issue. Despite the many attempts at replacement, the MP5 remains a staple of counter-terror units, military arsenals, and civilian collections, showing no signs of giving up its title anytime soon. The first choice for the good guys, the child of one of the greatest battle rifles ever developed, and certainly the king of the submachine guns, the MP5 is the definitive post-war SMG design, and undoubtedly one of the most iconic weapons ever produced.
And now for something completely different.
Hi. This channel blew up a bit, so I want to say a couple things, and I'd appreciate if you stick around for a minute or so. With my last video, I just want to release a quick addendum video in a few weeks, just to clear up a couple of things, but I completely stand by everything I said in it. I just want to correct and clarify some stuff that I've noticed, and that other people have pointed out. Not gonna lie, that video was rushed, and I want to ensure that my arguments are as strong as I can make them, and I'm giving you all accurate information. With that, I plan to stop posting weekly after I'm back from my holiday at the end of the month, as I feel I've put an arbitrary emphasis on making a new video every week, and it's become a detriment to the quality of the content I'm making, and I want to make accurate and entertaining history for all of you, but putting one out every week, it's just becoming impossible to do so. Mostly though, I wanted to say thank you for the incredible support you all have shown the last week. I was seriously considering dropping all this and focusing my efforts solely on finishing school for my upcoming final year, but the last video and everyone who's joined the channel this week has truly given me a drive to create content, and it's given the channel a new lease on life. So thank you for this opportunity to have a platform, albeit small. I intend to continue improving both my videos and the quality of my history, as I've been doing since I started this nearly a year ago, and I'm going to be more thorough in my work going forward. That's all from me for now. Thank you all again, and I'll see you in the next video.